The US embargo on Cuba is much worse than what it may seem like at first glance, and I'm going to tell you why. A lot of people tend to reply to talk of the embargo with stuff like, well, okay, but the embargo only impedes trade with the US, and there's also exemptions for medicine and for food, so it's not that bad, but it's actually not nearly that simple. First, the US is Cuba's natural geographical trading partner. It's a massive economy that's right next to Cuba's tiny little island, so Cuba is by default put at a massive disadvantage compared to its neighbors. But that's not why I'm making this video, don't worry, there's much more to this. The US enforces its embargo extraterritorially, meaning outside of its own territory, much more than you might think. How? Well, first, the US is the world's financial center. In order to safely trade with Cuba, a company needs to have literally no assets whatsoever in the USA itself, because otherwise they would be at risk of freezing or seizure for breaking the embargo. Now, let's say that you're a big company and you've got to choose between access to the US or to Cuba. Would you choose the USA, the world's biggest economy and its financial hub, or would you choose Cuba, a tiny little island nation of 11 million people? Obviously, you're going to choose the USA, and that's part of the embargo's design. It's crafted and maintained with this in mind. But wait, there's more. Any cargo ship or plane that stops in Cuba cannot go to the USA for 6 months. Since both countries are right next to each other with only 90 miles separating them, most shipping companies obviously choose the US over Cuba, so it's much harder for Cuba to even secure transport for its trade. But hey, let's say that there's companies who do literally no business with the US at all. Literally none. They have no operations there, no assets there whatsoever. None at all. Well, the US still targets them. To try and disincentivize trade with Cuba as much as possible, their executives are banned from entering the USA, and any assets that they have there are seized. If you're a businessman, not being able to enter the world's global financial and business hub is obviously a pretty big deal. You might also ask, well, why don't these companies just make subsidiaries to trade with Cuba then? Well, the embargo actually specifically targets subsidiaries, punishing their parent companies if they trade with Cuba. So that's just not possible. And what about those food and medical exemptions? Well, in practice, they barely even actually exist. They're intentionally designed to be as unclear as possible in order to create legal uncertainty. And since businesses are naturally risk-averse, most of them simply choose not to deal with Cuba at all, rather than jumping through all of those legal hoops and trying to avoid all of those little caveats that the embargo has in it. And those that try anyway can still have their shipments vetoed for whatever reason the authorities decide. So in practice, shipping food or medicine from the US to Cuba is so prohibitively difficult that most companies don't even bother to try. And that's 100% intended, and it always has been. The point of the supposed food and medical exemption is not legitimate humanitarian concern, it's rather a PR exercise of the US government. It's there so that they can say, well, on paper, there are exemptions for food and medicine, so clearly we're on the side of the Cuban people. So you can clearly see that the embargo covers much more than just what it might seem at first glance. It is designed to specifically leverage the USA's dominant global economic position to discourage as much trade around the world with Cuba as possible, and to punish anyone who dares to even try. The point of the Cuban embargo is simply to make the Cuban people suffer, and as long as the US government maintains it, it has no claim to caring about them at all, because it's simply obvious that it does not.